Hello, YouTube, and welcome to Level-Headed News. This is your host, Brenda, and I have 7 articles in this episode for you. All the URLs are in the description of the video for your convenience. First one here is off of All News Pipeline, and it says WikiLeaks confirms murdered DNC staffer was behind DNC. Podesta leaked emails that roiled the Clinton campaign. WikiLeaks has recently highlighted the murder of DNC staffer back during the election cycle, again pushing the theory that the staffer was responsible for the DNC Podesta email leaks. The official MSM narrative that Russians were behind the leaks. Background: Seth Rich and WikiLeaks. Amidst the leaked Podesta and DNC emails which roiled the Clinton team's campaign during the election cycle, a DNC data director was murdered in July of 2016. His name was Seth Rich. He was 27 years old, shot in the back as he was walking home, but nothing was taken from him, negating the motive was as being a robbery attempt. On August the 9th of 2016, WikiLeaks publicly offered a reward for information on Rich's murder, tweeting, "WikiLeaks offers $20,000 reward for information in murder of DNC staffer Seth Rich," along with a link to NBC Washington article about the reward offer. And it shows a copy of this tweet that WikiLeaks put out. It says also on August the 9th of 2016, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, during an interview with Nieuwshour, a Dutch television program, spoke of whistleblowers and the risks they take, then immediately referenced Seth Rich's murder. Assange says, "Whistleblowers go to significant efforts to get us material and often very significant risk. There's a 27-year-old who worked for the DNC who was shot in the back, murdered just a few weeks ago for unknown reasons as he was walking down the street in Washington." The interviewer says, "That was just a robbery, I believe, wasn't it?" And Assange says, "No, there's no finding." The interviewer says, "What are you suggesting?" And Assange says, "I'm suggesting that our sources take risks and they become concerned to see things occurring like that." And the interviewer says, "And was he one of your sources then?" And Assange says, "We don't comment on who our sources are." And the interviewer says, "But why make the suggestion about a young guy being shot in the streets of Washington?" And Assange says, "Because we have to understand how high the stakes are in the United States and that our sources face serious risks. That's why they come to us, so we can protect their anonymity." But it's quite something to suggest a murder. That's basically what you're doing. And Assange says, "Well, others have suggested that. We are investigating to understand what happened in that situation with Seth Rich. I think it's a concerning situation. There's not a conclusion yet. We wouldn't be willing to state a conclusion, but we are concerned about it. More importantly, a variety of WikiLeaks sources are concerned when that kind of thing happens." And there's video of that conversation if you want to watch it for yourself. Assange's statement made in August, along with the offer of a reward, which even the interviewer expressed his certainty that Assange was indeed implying that Rich was the source behind the leaks, seemed to be a clear indication that Rich was the leaker. Yet the mainstream media continued to treat any suspicion that his murder was in any way connected to being the leaker as a conspiracy theory. Piece of background before we get into the recent WikiLeaks Seth Rich connection. In those Podesta emails, there was a conversation about a leak that hit the press, unrelated to the WikiLeaks publications, but the tone of Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman, John Podesta, is quite chilling nonetheless. The email chain started with Robbie Mook talking about an example being made, which Podesta replied, "Agreed, happy to talk to the Davids. I think if we can survive the next month, it will be possible, maybe even straightforward, to get our arms around this once there's an actual campaign. I'm definitely for making an example of a suspected leaker, whether or not we have any real basis for it." Joel Brennanson Hillary's campaign strategist also spoke about making examples of how people who have violated the trust of HRC and the rest of the team, to which Podesta stated, "I generally agree with the point, but we need a strategy on this that goes beyond internal discipline." Once again, let me highlight that the discussion was about a different leak to the mainstream media, not about the WikiLeaks, but it does give a view of the type of mindset the Clinton campaign staffers before the Clinton campaign formally launched, and over a leak to the mainstream media that was not even particularly damaging. Note, Rich's death was followed by Clinton's researcher and author Victor Thorne on 8/1/16, ruled as suicide from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. And Sean Lucas died on 8/2/16 after a video went viral of him serving the former DNC chairwoman, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, with a lawsuit in early July of 2016, charging that the DNC had committed fraud in favoring Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders during the Democratic primary process. And there's video if you want to watch that. There's a link. It says his death was labeled accidental after taking a deadly combination of drugs. Present-day WikiLeaks Seth Guccifer 2.0 and the model and actress. On April the 8th of 2017, highlighted a web page which supposedly contains a series of direct messages from former Playboy model and actress Robin Young and Guccifer 2.0. Young states on her website that she had been following Guccifer 2.0, who has claimed leaked emails to WikiLeaks on Twitter and considers him to be a hero and friend, according to Zero Hedge. WikiLeaks put out a tweet that says direct messages from U.S. alleged Russian spy Guccifer 2 and to actress model Robin Young, according to the latter. Says the majority of the private conversations between Young and Guccifer 2.0 was heavy flirting, but the reason WikiLeaks appears to have highlighted the page is shown in a series of private messages dated August 25th of 2016, where Guccifer 2.0 claimed to have a whistleblower at the DNC stating his name is Seth. He further stated, "I'm eager to find fact about Seth. I'm sure it wasn't just a robbery." He followed that up with, "I'd be grateful to you if there's any chance you can help me find the person who can find the evidence that Seth was assassinated." We have that conversation here if you want to pull it up and take a look at that. It says the bottom line says points to highlight here is that one, WikiLeaks did not specifically mention Seth Rich when they provided a link to Young's uploaded chats with Guccifer 2.0, but nothing else in those private chats indicate anything that WikiLeaks has previously spoken about at length, except a reference to Rich and his death. That tweet came amidst an overwhelming amount of the tweets on the CIA and NSA spying, makes it appear like it came out of nowhere and not related to the main focus of their previous or subsequent tweets. Had previously claimed on multiple occasions that he was the one that actively hacked the DNC, which apparently was discredited by others and highlighted by WikiLeaks on April the 8th of 2017. And the private messages do seem to offer an admittance on his part that he did not hack the emails, but they were leaked to him by Seth. That once again, WikiLeaks is trying to reveal that Seth Rich was the originating source behind the leaked DNC Podesta emails, while still maintaining their public policy that Assange reiterated in the interview shown at the beginning of the article, where he said, "We don't comment on who our sources are." A combined $150,000 in rewards being offered for information relating to the death of Seth Rich. $20,000 from WikiLeaks, $25,000 from the Metropolitan Police Department, $1,000 reward offered by Republican lobbyist Jack Berkman. Help keep independent media alive, become a patron, it says here, and it gives a link to that if you want to do that. There is some video in this. DM release indicates Seth, and then it trails off, but Seth Rich, of course. And there's that one. Now, the next article that I have is off of Liberty Headlines to do with the IRS commissioner. He says, my own tax returns. Well, it came from the Daily Sheeple, and it says everyone knows that tax season sucks, and it's not just because we have to fork over our hard-earned dollars to a wasteful government. To add insult to injury, our government has devised one of the most complicated tax codes in the world. Every year, most of us agonize over getting our taxes done right, or we spend more money to have someone else prepare our taxes, when even the head of the IRS doesn't prepare its own taxes. That's what IRS Commissioner John Costigan admitted at a National Press Club luncheon last week. Actually, I do get a refund myself, and what I usually do is then figure out how much of it I can use to start paying my estimated taxes for the next year as that goes. So I'm just like everybody else, confused a little bit by the tax code. I do not do my own tax return, even though I went to law school and took tax courses, but the code compared to when I was in law school is phenomenally more complex and more difficult to understand, he says. Said that he'd like to have the tax code simplified, but admitted that he doesn't think it'll happen anytime soon. On the subject of moving to a one-page form that could reduce staff or eliminate the IRS entirely, he stated, so if we end up with one pager and everybody could fill it out without worrying about a lot of deductions, we have tax expenditures of 1.3 trillion or more a year. So you could lower tax rates a lot, get rid of all of that, and have a much simpler process for taxpayers. And at that point, we would be able to do with fewer people. The likelihood of that probably is not great, he says. And the next article that I have for you, this is off of Zero Hedge, also has to do with taxes. And let's see if we can get it up here. It says Trump scraps phenomenal tax plan, goes back to the drawing board. Promised in early February that he would unveil a phenomenal tax plan within, well, it was just scrapped because AP reports Trump has scrapped the tax plan he campaigned on and is going back to the drawing board, hoping to find a plan that will have Republican consensus, something his current proposal has failed to achieve. In doing so, the president threatens the timetable of what many had seen as the primary driver behind the entire first-year agenda, which is not in peril and may not come until early of 2018, if not later. According to the AP, while Trump's first attempt to write legislation in its early stages and the White House has kept much of it under wraps, it has already sprouted the consideration of a series of unorthodox proposals, including a drastic cut to the payroll tax aimed at appealing to Democrats. Some view the search for the new option as a result of Trump's refusal to set clear parameters for his plan and his exceedingly challenging endgame, reducing tax rates enough to spur faster growth without blowing up the federal or the budget deficit. The good news, the ambitious pace to figure out a plan reflects Trump's haste to move quickly past a bruising failure to broker compromise within his own party on how to replace the health insurance law enacted under President Barack Obama. The bad news, the administration officials cited by AP say it's now unlikely the tax overhaul will meet the August deadline set by Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. This video here that says what Trump's presidency could mean for taxes, if you want to watch that. Why is it the White House, by which we mean Gary Cohen and Goldman Sachs, bypassing Congress and coming up with its own tax plan? One reason proposed is that it is trying to learn the lessons from healthcare. Rather than accepting a bill written by lawmakers, White House officials are taking a more active role. While administration officials have signaled that they want to pass tax legislation with only Republican votes, yet they've also held listening sessions with House Democrats. In other words, there will be consensus for both parties. One problem, however, is how to raise offsetting government revenues to make the plan revenue neutral and not add to the budget deficit, something which would lead to further clashes with conservative and even moderate Republicans. White House aides say the goal is to cut tax rates sharply enough to improve the economic picture in depressed rural and industrial pockets of the country where many Trump voters live. But the administration so far has swatted down alternative ways for raising revenues, such as carbon tax, to offset lower rates. More details. Trump, who brands himself as a deal maker, has not said which trade-offs he might accept, and uncommittal or non-committal on the leading blueprints from Representative Kevin Brady, chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. One notable change, as expected, the bat is dead. Brady, Republican of Texas, has proposed border adjustment system which would eliminate corporate deductions on imports to raise $1 trillion over 10 years that could fund lower corporate tax rates. But that possibility has rankled retailers who say it would lead to higher prices and threaten millions of jobs, while some lawmakers have worried that the system would violate World Trade Organization rules. Brady has said he intends to amend the blueprint, but has not spelled out how he would do so. Among other options are being shopped on Capitol Hill, including changing the House Republican plan to eliminate much of the payroll tax and cut corporate tax rates. This would require a new dedicated funding source for Social Security. It would also mean that the Trumpflation trade and any stock market upside as a result of reduced effective taxes are similarly dead. As previously reported, instead of BAT, the administration is currently contemplating a VAT. The change proposed by GOP lobbyists with close ties to Trump administration would transform Brady's plan on imports into something closer to a value-added tax by also eliminating the deduction of labor expenses. This would bring it in line with the WTO rules and generate an additional $12 trillion over 10 years, according to budget estimates. Those additional revenues could then enable the end of the 12.4% payroll tax, split evenly between employers and employees that fund Social Security while keeping the health insurance payroll tax in place. This approach would give a worker earnings of $60,000 a year an additional $3,720 in take-home pay, a possible win that lawmakers could highlight back in their districts, even though it would involve changing the funding mechanism for Social Security, according to the lobbyists who asked for anonymity to discuss the proposal without disrupting early negotiations. While the White House would not comment on the plan, it is recently said a value-added tax based on consumption is not under consideration as of now. No matter what the final shape Trump's proposal takes, it appears almost inevitable that the president will again face significant internal opposition. The lack of detail about how to significantly rewrite tax laws for the first time in 30 years may provide Trump with some time to build consensus among Republicans. But without Trump laying down his hand, lawmakers appear reluctant to back a plan that will likely stir controversy. Because there are trade-offs congressmen need to cover from the president to withstand the lobbyists and constituents who are going to complain, said Bill Gale, an economist at Brookings Institution who worked at the White House Council of Economics advisor during President George W. Bush's administration. The Trump administration appears to have shut out the economists who helped assemble one of his campaign tax overhaul plans, which independent analysis shows would have increased the budget deficit. It's a little frustrating that they feel they have to write a new tax plan when they have a tax plan, said Stephen Moore, an economist at the Conservative Heritage Foundation who helped formulate tax policy for the Trump campaign. Portman, Republican of Ohio, a member of the Senate Finance Committee, said that all of the trial balloons surfacing in public don't represent the work that's being done behind the scenes. It's not really what's going on, Portman said. What's going on is they're working with various ideas. Meanwhile, as we showed several weeks ago, and there's a insert here of it says Exhibit 1, tax reform and infrastructure beneficiaries have reversed course as of March the 30th of 2017. And it's a chart, shows the infrastructure beneficiaries versus Standard & Poor's 500. And then it also shows on the same thing, the or same chart, the high tax bracket versus Standard & Poor 500. Investors no longer believe Trump can deliver a tax plan, with Goldman Sachs' high tax basket having wiped out all gains since the election. Stocks rallied on the promise of lower taxes and fewer regulations, but the Dow Jones Industrial Average has dipped 1.2% over the past month as the path for healthcare and tax revisions has become muddied. The White House is going to need its own clear direction, or it's going to need to defer to Congress. But saying that your plan is forthcoming and then not producing a plan in stasis, said Alan Cole, an economist at the Conservative Tax Foundation. So there we go with that. The next one we have is off Liberty Headlines. It says Alabama's Republican governor quits amid sex scandal. D.com originally. It says Alabama Governor Robert Bentley, a Republican, has announced his resignation Monday amid an explosive sex scandal and allegations that he used his office to facilitate and hide evidence of his affair with an advisor. Bentley, a 76-year-old grandfather of 8, inadvertently texted his wife of 50 years, Diane, with a message meant for his mistress, former advisor Rebecca Caldwell Mason. I love you, Rebecca, he texted to Diane, who abruptly filed for divorce from the governor in August of 2015. Diane said her marriage suffered an irretrievable breakdown, according to court records. The two had been married since July 24th, 1965. Bentley, a former dermatologist and once a Baptist deacon at the First Baptist Church in Tuscaloosa, is said to have regularly referred to Mason, a married mother of 3 who is 30 years his junior, as baby during government meetings. The press nicknamed him Love Gov. News of his resignation came only hours after a House committee began impeachment hearings and just after Bentley was booked into Montgomery County Jail. He pled guilty to 2 misdemeanor charges, failing to file a major contribution report and knowingly converting campaign contributions to personal use. The Associated Press described the moment Bentley signed a plea deal. Bentley appeared sullen and looked down at the floor during the Monday afternoon session. The agreement specifies that Bentley must surrender campaign funds totaling $36,000 within a week and perform 100 hours of community service as a physician. He also cannot seek public office again. After posting $600 bond and leaving the jail, he went to the state capitol to announce his resignation. I've always believed the honor of serving as your governor is a calling that God placed on my life, Bentley said when he resigned. Though I have sometimes failed, I have always tried to live up to the high expectations that people place on the person who holds this esteemed office. There have been times that I have let you and our people down, and I'm sorry for that. He continued, I can no longer allow my family, dear friends, and dedicated staff and cabinet to be subjected to the consequences that my past actions have brought on them. I want you to know I love our people with all my heart. On Friday, Bentley had insisted he won't resign. Alabama's House Judiciary Committee accused Bentley of abusing his power and creating an atmosphere of intimidation. In its 130-page report, the former governor allegedly directed law enforcement officers to hunt down and seize recordings that would have exposed his extramarital relationship. Bentley also allegedly told officers to break up with Mason for him. Jack Sharman, special counsel to the committee and author of this report, said Bentley directed law enforcement to advance his personal interests and, in a process characterized by increasing obsession and paranoia, subjected career law enforcement officers to tasks intended to protect his reputation. The committee report included text sent from Bentley to Mason, which were read by Diane on the governor's state-issued iPad given to her by her husband. I miss you, I need you, I want you, you are the only one. Bentley is accused of threatening the First Lady's staff to keep his affair secret. According to the report, Mason left the office with hassled and her clothing in disarray. The report says while he was on a business trip in Washington, D.C., Bentley opened his hotel room door wearing only boxers and expecting to see Mason. Lieutenant Governor Kay Ivey will replace Bentley. She is scheduled to be sworn in as the 54th governor on Monday evening. Oh, my. The next one is off BizPac Review. It says, some Dems openly consider reinstating filibuster rule if they regain Senate control. The base isn't liking it. One of the assumptions behind Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and Republicans changing the filibuster rules in the Senate to force up or down vote on Supreme Court nominees has always been the fact that should Democrats regain power, they will be in position to use the rule for their own nominees, which didn't bother many conservatives, especially given that Republicans never put up much of a fight on Democratic SCOTUS nominees anyway, but it was used as a talking point by some against the so-called nuclear option. But now that the bomb has gone off, if you will, it looks like at least a few Democratic senators are open to the idea of going back to the old rules. Their party retakes the majority. On Monday, Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey told MSNBC when the Democrats return to the majority and capture the presidency, which we will, that day is going to arrive. We will restore the 60-vote margin. We will ensure that for the Supreme Court there is that special margin that any candidate has to reach, because that is essential to ensuring that our country has a confidence in people who are nominated rather than just someone who passes a litmus test, he says. In their coverage of this news entitled Democrat Contemplate How to Forfeit Their Power Upon Regaining the Senate, the liberal Huffington Post opines the idea that Democrats would one day make it harder for a Supreme Court nominee to be confirmed is baffling from a partisan standpoint. Under such a scenario, Democrats would be in control of the Senate and would therefore already have the number of votes needed to defeat any nominee, since as of last week, the process now requires just a simple majority vote. Thus, if Democrats controlled the Senate and the president were a Republican, Democrats wouldn't need to raise the filibuster threshold to block that president's choice. And if the president were a Democrat, Senate Democrats would actually be making it harder for that president's nominee to end up on the court. Be the correct view from a partisan liberal standpoint, and exactly the reason why many conservatives argued for the use of the nuclear option this time around. According to the Huffington Post, the logic for Democrats who would consider going back to the old process is all about regaining institutional authority for the legislative branch and encouraging more bipartisanship. There's also the possibility of lowering the threshold from 60 to something else entirely. One of the things I've floated a number of times was a swap. Delaware Senator Chris Coons told the Post, "Let's repair some of the damage done in 2013, restore a filibuster for cabinet, sub-cabinet, district court, circuit court, but make it 55 vote margin or a 56 vote margin. And in exchange for that, let's lower the filibuster margin to 56. I would be very interested in both strengthening the filibuster rule and strengthening just some of the operations of the institutions of the Senate so that there has to be bipartisanship, so that there has to be a few members of the other party signing off and supporting everything." Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy wasn't quite as enthusiastic as his colleagues, but he didn't slam the door either, telling some MSNBC, "I don't think should bet the farm on Democrats reversing course if and when we take control of the Senate." And even the king of obstruction himself, Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, told the Huffington Post in January that he'd be willing to reinstate the filibuster rules overturned by Harry Reid and company in 2013. Given the events of the past few weeks, that's probably not how he feels now. While all this could be nothing more than posturing, the thoughts of Democrats willingly giving up power, especially since they started this whole nuclear option thing in the first place, seems almost impossible to comprehend. Put it this way, I'll believe it when I see it. Obviously, libs aren't thrilled at the possibility. And they put out a tweet here that says, "Jesus, once again, Dems bring Robert Rules to a gunfight." And there's a bunch of more tweets here if you want to pull them up and read them. One says, "Guys, taking the high road is getting you nowhere. Dems have to start fighting fire with fire." Next one is off of BizPac Review. It says, "A professor in hot water for threatening Trump in string of sick tweets, cries victim of right-wing propaganda." The professor from California State University, Fresno, who called for President Trump to hang, now claims he is the victim of a right-wing campaign of harassment and intimidation. History professor Lars Mazak's tweet in February stating, "To save American democracy, Trump must hang. The sooner and the higher the better," was one of many vile and politically charged tweets that caused the university to respond. Fox News put out a tweet, says, "Anti-Trump tweets, professor responds to University Review." Let's see. It says, "Fresno State President Joseph Castro issued a statement saying Mazchak's remarks would be reviewed for potential threats of violence," to which the professor responded with his own statement, according to KMPH. See, there's a tweet here from Mark Romano. It says, "Professor stands by his call for Trump to be hanged. He still has a job at Cal State Fresno." Says Mazachak reached out to KMPH Fox 26 News in an email refuting his call for violence against the president and accusing the university of embracing claims made by right-wing propaganda outlets. And there's some more tweets. It says, "According to Maslak's email, I'm appalled that the president of the university is allowing himself to be instrumentalized for a right-wing smear campaign. Specifically, the suggestions that I had made a potential direct threat of violence that may violate the law is unwarranted. It constitutes an embrace by the university of the claims made by propaganda outlets. I would have wished for an opportunity to explain my views to the university prior to any statement on its part of the substance of the public accusations against me. I was not contacted by them, even though I sent a message to the president on Saturday." The Breitbart Daily Caller piece that created a selective collage of some of my weeks-old tweets had the purpose of inciting a campaign of harassment and intimidation by claiming I had either made a tangible threat against Mr. Trump or had advocated for violence against either Trump or Republicans in general. I've explained on Twitter as well as in a statement to several media outlets over the weekend the context of one of my incriminating tweets contained the assertion that Trump must hang. It is based on the assessment that the substantial continuity between fascism and the present Republican Party makes it likely that the deeds of his government will be the subject of court proceedings or even a tribunal akin to the Nuremberg trials. Mazurchak argued that claims he was advocating murder were far-fetched. I can see how a malicious observer could twist it to mean an incitement to violence. I would be horrified to learn that anyone would have read this tweet as an invitation to violence. I still do not think, within the context at the time and within the context of my other sentiments on Twitter, that any responsible reader could come to that conclusion, however, he wrote. He continued to defend his position and slam the critics allegedly smearing him in the rest of his statement. He concluded with a promise to come. I'm currently working on a paper laying out my argument for the comparison between the current Republican administration and party and German fascism in more detail and with more differentiation. And the final article in this episode is off BizPack Review. It says Republicans slam ADHD Trump on MSNBC. Previous not enough adult supervision for this man. GOP strategist Rick Wilson slammed President Trump for being a man baby and dismissed Reince Priebus as a weak and ineffective chief of staff. The Republican consultant disagreed with discussion that the president is rebranding and creating a Trump doctrine during an appearance on MSNBC's All In on Monday. So, if you want to watch that, this is a president with a stalking, gigantic case of ADHD. Wilson went off to host Chris Hayes. He cannot focus for 30 seconds on anything. Every bright and shiny object distracts him, and he doesn't believe anything in his heart. There's no ideological North Star for this guy. There's nothing he truly cares about except for his own ego. Everything is drawn to the event horizon of his ego. Wilson apparently based his argument on reports from the mainstream media, which only focuses on criticizing the president and belittling the significant accomplishments he has made in his short time in office, including choice of Supreme Court nominee Judge Neil Gorsuch, who was sworn in on Monday. Trump put out a tweet saying, Judge Neil Gorsuch officially sworn in as Justice of the Supreme Court. I'm not yet tired of all the winning. Continued to disparage the president, saying he is not a guy who has thought about the issues and thought about policies beyond what he thinks gets good applause line at rallies. The fact that this guy with a famous slogan on a red hat is not a legislative or political or governance agenda at all. In the panel discussion, which included former included former RNC chairman Michael Steele, the MSNBC guest tackled the topic of Trump's agenda and questioned who is really in charge at the White House. Priebus as not being adult supervision for Trump and wondered if anyone would notice if he was gone. Every president benefits from having a strong, effective chief of staff. Is a nice man and good administrator in some ways, but he is not adult supervision for this man-baby president, Wilson said. He's not able to say to Trump, stop tweeting, shut up, read your speeches, go to these events, do these things, make these calls, stop having 47 people in office and change your mind on things every 30 seconds, he continued his tirade. You know, there's a lot of talk about whether Reince Priebus will leave or stay, Wilson concluded. The question is, would you even notice at this point who manages himself? He's not managed by a chief of staff. Every president needs one. It's an iron law of Washington. And that's all I have in this episode. Another episode to follow. If you like what I'm doing here, give it a thumbs up and share it on your social media so everybody gets to hear the news. And don't forget to subscribe. That way you'll stay informed. See you in the next one.